Daniel Cross woke before the city did, the way he always had since sleep stopped feeling like rest and started feeling like a liability. At 5:12 a.m., the skyline outside his penthouse was still wrapped in darkness. The glass towers below glowed faintly, scattered lights burning through the early morning haze like watchful eyes that never blinked. From 40 floors above the street, the city looked disciplined, orderly, predictable. The kind of place where every problem had a solution if you had enough money, enough leverage, enough patience. Daniel stood barefoot on the cold marble floor, one hand resting against the glass. His reflection stared back at him, sharp and composed, tailored physique, controlled posture, the face of a man investors trusted with billions of dollars, and eyes that gave nothing away. The silence inside the penthouse was total. No hum of conversation, no clatter of dishes, no distant sounds of another human moving through shared space. Just the soft whir of climate control and the faint, ever-present hum of the city far below. He hadn't noticed when the silence became permanent, only that one day it was all that remained. Daniel crossed the living room, past furniture selected by designers who had never met him, never asked what he liked, only what image he wanted to project. The kitchen lights flicked on automatically as he poured himself coffee from a machine that cost more than most people's rent. He drank it black, always had. Coffee wasn't comfort, it was fuel. By 6:30 a.m. he was dressed, perfectly pressed suit, neutral tie, watch positioned just right on his wrist. He moved through his day with the same precision that had built his empire, no wasted motion, no visible hesitation. The elevator ride down to the private garage was silent. His driver greeted him with polite professionalism, eyes forward, questions unasked. Even the people paid to be close to Daniel Cross understood the unspoken rule: proximity did not mean familiarity. The drive to headquarters passed in a blur of steel and glass. The city was waking now. Traffic thickened. Coffee shops opened. Ordinary lives unfolding at ground level, while Daniel remained sealed inside his controlled descent. At 8 a.m. sharp, he entered the boardroom. The long, polished table reflected the ceiling lights like still water. Faces turned toward him, executives, legal advisors, trustees of the Cross Family Trust, people who spoke softly but carried the weight of generational power in every word. "Your numbers are strong, Daniel," one of the trustees began, fingers steepled. "Apollo Systems exceeded projections again this quarter." Daniel nodded once. He already knew. "But optics matter," another voice added smoothly. "Stability matters." There it was. Daniel folded his hands on the table, saying nothing. He had learned long ago that silence unsettled people more than argument. "You've been alone a long time," a third trustee continued. "The press has noticed. Investors have noticed." "And your family has noticed," someone else said. That one slipped past his defenses. The Cross Family Trust wasn't just wealth. It was control disguised as inheritance. Clauses written by men who believed legacy required appearance, and appearance required family. A man without visible roots was, in their eyes, unfinished, unstable. "Public perception becomes reality at your level," the chairman concluded. "We need reassurance." Daniel met his gaze. "My personal life has never interfered with performance." "No," the man agreed calmly, "but the absence of one now threatens future confidence." The meeting ended with polite smiles and veiled warnings. By noon, Daniel's phone rang. His mother. He considered letting it go to voicemail, then answered. "We're hosting a family weekend," she said without preamble. Her voice was as controlled as his, refined by decades of expectation. "At the estate. All the trustees will be there." "I have commitments," Daniel replied evenly. "You will rearrange them, and this time, Daniel, you won't come alone." There was a pause, a deliberate one. "I'm tired of excuses," she continued. "Your father would be disappointed." That name landed like a weight on his chest. The line went dead before he could respond. By the time Daniel returned to his penthouse that night, the city lights outside felt harsher, less forgiving. He loosened his tie, tossed his jacket aside, and stood in the middle of the living room, suddenly unsure what to do with the space around him. He had built companies from nothing, negotiated hostile takeovers, survived losses that nearly hollowed him out. But this demand to prove he was still capable of connection, felt cruel, in a way no market crash ever had. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. The concierge network he used was discreet, no public postings, no paper trails, the kind of service people like Daniel relied on when they needed solutions without exposure. He stared at the blank field for a long moment, then typed. Seeking a temporary companion for a private family engagement, 1 weekend only, absolute discretion required. Compensation, $15,000. His finger hovered over the trackpad. This wasn't desperation, he told himself. It was strategy, optics, control. He clicked submit. Miles away, in a one-room apartment on the edge of the city, Elena Reyes sat at a small kitchen table beneath a flickering light. The paint on the walls was peeling, the heater rattled as if it might give up at any moment. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and reheated soup. Hospital paperwork covered the table, insurance notices, appointment slips, payment reminders stamped in red. Elena folded them one by one, as though order might soften what they represented. In the next room, her 6-year-old son Lucas slept fitfully. Every few minutes, a soft cough escaped his chest, followed by a shallow breath that made Elena's shoulders tense automatically. She checked the time. 2:27 a.m. She checked her phone. The number on her banking app hadn't changed. $47. Enough for groceries for maybe 2 days, not enough for the inhaler refill the pharmacy had already warned her about. Elena rubbed her temples, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. She had worked a double shift cleaning hotel rooms, scrubbing bathrooms tourists would never remember, smiling politely at guests who barely saw her. Tomorrow she would do it again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Muddy Soul, the woman who cleaned luxury apartments on the north side of the city. "Don't laugh," the message read. "I know this sounds crazy, but it pays real money." Elena hesitated, then opened the forwarded message. $15,000, 1 weekend, discretion required. Her first instinct was anger. Her second was disbelief. Her third was fear. This wasn't for people like her. She imagined the kind of man who would make such an offer. The power, the imbalance, the risk. She looked toward the bedroom door where Lucas slept, clutching the worn stuffed elephant he refused to let go of. She didn't need luxury. She needed time. Time to breathe. Time to get ahead of the bills. Time to make sure her son could see a doctor without her heart racing every time the phone rang. Elena closed her eyes. She didn't know Daniel Cross. She didn't know his world. But she knew desperation when she felt it, and she knew opportunity when it appeared wrapped in fear. Her fingers hovered over the reply button. Whatever this was, it could change everything.
Daniel Cross did not expect her voice to sound like that. He had imagined desperation would announce itself loudly, apologies in every sentence, a trembling eagerness to please. Instead, the woman on the line spoke with calm precision, her tone measured, as if she were negotiating a business deal rather than responding to an offer that could change her life. "Before we go any further," she said, "I need to know exactly what you're asking." Daniel leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him. The city glowed behind his office windows, all glass and light and distance. He appreciated clarity. He respected it. It was one of the few things that still earned his attention. "1 weekend," he replied. You accompany me to a private family gathering. You present yourself as my partner. Nothing more." Silence stretched across the line. "And afterward?" she asked. "Afterward, we part ways. No contact, no expectations." Another pause. He could hear something faint in the background, a machine humming, a soft rhythmic sound that didn't belong in a quiet room. A hospital, he realized. The thought tightened something in his chest. "My name is Elena Reyes," she said, "and I don't accept vague terms." Daniel smiled, despite himself. "Fair," he said. "You'll receive $15,000, half up front, half at the end of the weekend." Elena exhaled slowly, the sound controlled, but he could hear the weight behind it. "I need conditions," she said. "Go on." "This stays between us. No photos, no social media, no press." "Agreed." "I won't be humiliated, not by your family, not by your friends." He considered that. "You will be treated with respect." "That's not a promise. That's an intention." He straightened in his chair. "You have my word," he said, surprised to find he meant it. There was a longer silence this time. When Elena spoke again, her voice softened, not with weakness, but with resolve. "I have a child. He will not be involved, he will not be mentioned, and if at any point this arrangement puts him at risk, I walk away." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. This was the complication he hadn't planned for. "Understood. Your child remains completely separate." "One more thing," Elena added. "If I'm playing your partner, I won't be treated like hired help. That means I don't sleep on a couch, I don't disappear when it's inconvenient. If the lie has cracks, it will fail." Daniel let out a quiet breath, half amusement, half respect. "You're very confident," he said. "I don't have the luxury of being anything else." Something shifted then. Not attraction, not pity, recognition. "Come meet me," Daniel said, "tomorrow, my office. If either of us isn't satisfied, we end this before it begins. Send the address and the advance." The call ended. Daniel stared at his phone longer than necessary before transferring the funds. Across the city, Elena watched the notification appear on her screen. $7,500, deposit received. Her hands shook for exactly 3 seconds. Then she squared her shoulders, walked into her son's room, and kissed his forehead as he slept, his breathing shallow but steady. "One weekend," she whispered. She didn't know yet that this offer wasn't just a solution. It was the beginning of everything unraveling. Elena almost turned around twice before reaching the top floor. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, the soft instrumental music clashing with the tight knot in her chest. The numbers climbed in silence. 28, 32, 40. Each floor felt like another step away from the life she knew, and toward something she didn't yet understand. When the doors opened, the space didn't look like an office. It looked like control. Glass walls, muted colors, no clutter, no personal photographs, everything deliberate, everything chosen, the kind of place where nothing existed without a reason. Daniel Cross stood near the window, his back to her, jacket off, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest effort without vulnerability. He turned as she entered, his gaze steady, assessing without being obvious. "Elena Reyes," he said, "you're punctual." "I can't afford not to be," she replied. That earned the slightest curve of his mouth, not quite a smile, something restrained. They sat across from each other at a long table that felt more like a negotiation battlefield than a place for conversation. A carafe of water stood untouched between them. Daniel spoke first. "You've read the terms." "I've read the outline. Now I want the truth." He inclined his head, granting permission.
My parents, Daniel said, are arriving for a private family weekend. They believe I'm in a serious relationship. They expect permanence, stability, proof. And you don't have that, Elena said. I don't, he admitted. What I have is time pressure and expectations I don't intend to meet honestly. Elena folded her hands on the table. Then let's be clear, she said. This isn't pretending to flirt at dinner. This is playing commitment. Yes. Which means you don't get to disappear emotionally when it's convenient. People who love each other don't check out. Daniel studied her, something sharpening behind his eyes. You're very invested for someone who plans to leave after 48 hours. I'm invested in surviving, Elena replied evenly, and bad acting gets exposed. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, measuring. Daniel broke it. What do you want beyond the money? Elena didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was steady but honest. I want respect, I want clear boundaries, and I want you to understand something. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not desperate in the way you think. I'm careful. If this arrangement turns ugly, I walk, even if it costs me. That surprised him. He had expected fear, compliance, gratitude. Instead, she was drawing lines. Fair, Daniel said slowly. Then here are mine. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were details, schedule, locations, family profiles, expectations. This weekend will be intense. My mother notices everything. My father asks questions that sound harmless but aren't. You'll be observed. I've been observed my whole life, Elena replied, usually by people deciding whether I deserve help. That landed heavier than she intended. Daniel looked at her more closely now, not as a solution, but as a person. There's one more condition, he said. She tensed slightly. Go on. If this works, Daniel said, you stay through the entire visit. No disappearing midway, no emotional distance when it matters. Elena nodded. Agreed. And, he added, we rehearse, thoroughly. A breath escaped her. Figures. They stood at the same time, a quiet synchronization neither acknowledged. This is the last moment either of us can back out, Daniel said. Elena met his eyes. Then let's not lie badly. He extended his hand. She took it. The handshake lingered a second too long, not with heat, but with recognition. Two people who had learned to negotiate life from opposite ends of the spectrum. As Elena left the office, she didn't look back. Daniel remained standing long after she was gone, aware of something unfamiliar settling into his carefully ordered world. This wasn't just a transaction anymore. It was a test. The first rehearsal felt nothing like romance. It felt like construction. Daniel's penthouse was quieter than Elena expected. Not empty, quiet. The kind of silence that existed because nothing in the space had ever been allowed to echo with laughter or arguments or unfinished conversations. Everything was polished, intentional, distant. Elena stood near the window, her coat still on, scanning the room the way she scanned hospital waiting rooms, quickly, efficiently, noting exits, corners, and places she could sit if she needed to ground herself. Daniel noticed. You can take your coat off, he said. You're not being evaluated. She looked at him. Habit. Fair enough, he thought. They sat across from each other on opposite ends of the sofa, a tablet resting on the coffee table between them. On its screen, a clean typed document titled, Our Story. Daniel tapped it once. We met 8 months ago, he began. Charity gala, nothing dramatic. Elena raised an eyebrow. That's already a problem. Why? Your family will expect drama, she said. People with money like origin stories that justify risk. He studied her, then nodded slowly. All right, then where? Not a gala, she said. Something unplanned, something human. Daniel exhaled. A delayed flight? She considered it. Better. You helped me carry a stroller. We talked. You didn't ask for my number. That's what made me curious. That was not how Daniel Cross operated, which was precisely why it worked. He typed. They built the lie carefully, brick by brick. How they met, who reached out first, what they admired about each other, what irritated them in small, believable ways. She hates that I schedule everything, Daniel read aloud. True, Elena said, you do. And he leaves cabinet doors open, she added. I don't. You will, she said calmly. They'll notice things like that. Hours passed. They practiced eye contact, casual touches, how long his hand would rest at her lower back, when it was appropriate to step away, when it wasn't. Too stiff, Elena said at one point. You look like you're guarding something. I am, Daniel replied. She softened slightly, then let me in, just enough. That was harder than he expected. They practiced sitting closer, his arm around her shoulders, her leaning in without shrinking. Every movement felt unnatural to him, like learning a language he'd avoided his entire life. At one point, Daniel laughed, actually laughed, when Elena recounted a fake argument they supposedly had about burnt toast. The sound surprised them both. You don't do that often, she observed. No, I don't, he admitted. As evening crept in, the rehearsals grew quieter, less mechanical, more personal. Daniel asked, what would they say I love about you? Elena hesitated. That I listen. He looked up. That I don't interrupt you when you speak. That I notice when you're tired, even if you pretend you're not. Daniel swallowed. That's dangerously close to truth, he said. She met his gaze, then adjusted. Silence settled again, but this time it was different, not empty, full. They stood at the same time without planning it, close, too close to pretend this was still only practice. This doesn't change anything, Daniel said quietly. No, it doesn't, Elena agreed. But when she left that night, Daniel found himself standing by the window long after her car disappeared, and Elena, riding the bus home, realized she hadn't thought about the money once in the last hour. That scared her more than anything else.
Elena was halfway to the door when Daniel stopped her. Stay. The word wasn't a command, it wasn't a plea either. It landed somewhere in between, quiet, deliberate, and unsettling in how carefully it was spoken. She turned slowly. That wasn't part of the agreement. Daniel nodded once. I know. That's why I'm asking, not telling. The city outside the penthouse windows had shifted into night, lights flickering on like constellations that didn't quite form patterns. The rehearsal had run longer than either of them intended. The air between them felt heavier now, charged with something they were both pretending not to name. My parents arrive tomorrow afternoon, Daniel said. If you come in fresh, if you leave and return, there will be gaps, questions. They'll notice. Elena folded her arms. You're saying the lie needs continuity. I'm saying it needs to look lived in. She studied him carefully, not for manipulation, for danger. Where would I sleep? She asked. The guest room, he answered immediately, on the other side of the penthouse. Her shoulders loosened slightly. And boundaries, she pressed? Unchanged. Nothing happens unless you initiate it. Nothing crosses lines we haven't agreed on. Elena looked toward the windows, then back at him. In her mind, she saw the hospital bills on her kitchen table, her son's breathing machine humming through the night, the thin line between stability and collapse. One night, she told herself, one controlled night. Fine, she said, one night. Daniel exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The guest room was immaculate, too immaculate, like it had never actually been used. Elena set her bag on the bed and sat down slowly, hands resting on her knees. She wasn't afraid of Daniel. She was afraid of how easy this was starting to feel. Later, as the city quieted and the penthouse lights dimmed, Elena wandered into the kitchen, unable to sleep. She found Daniel there, sleeves rolled up, staring at a glass of water like it might offer answers. You don't drink? She asked.
"Not when I need control," he replied. She nodded, understanding that more deeply than he knew. They stood in silence, the kind that didn't rush to be filled. "Why not just tell them the truth?" Elena asked softly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because the truth costs more than lies in my family." She didn't argue. Some truths were too expensive to carry openly. At one point, Daniel glanced at the clock. "If you want to back out, now's the moment. No explanation, no penalty." Elena met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I don't quit in the middle, especially not when someone's counting on me." He nodded once, respect settling in where calculation had been. As the night stretched on, something subtle shifted. They didn't touch, they didn't flirt, but they shared stories that weren't rehearsed. Daniel spoke of his father, of growing up in rooms full of people who spoke of legacy but never about fear. Elena spoke of learning to stay quiet in rooms where asking for help felt like weakness. When Elena finally returned to the guest room, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart heavier than it had been when she arrived. This wasn't just crossing a logistical line, it was crossing into each other's lives, and neither of them knew how to retreat now.
The estate didn't rise out of the countryside. It asserted itself. Stone walls curved along a private road lined with ancient trees, their branches arching overhead like a deliberate passageway. The iron gates opened without pause, as if the land itself had been expecting them. Elena watched it all through the passenger window, hands folded in her lap, posture controlled. Daniel drove in silence. "Your parents live here?" she asked finally. "They host here," he corrected. "In living implies comfort." The house emerged slowly, massive but restrained, old money without ornamentation, no excess, no warmth either. It wasn't designed to impress strangers, it was designed to remind family where they stood. As the car rolled to a stop, Elena inhaled once, deeply. "This is where people get judged," she said quietly. Daniel didn't deny it. A woman stepped out onto the stone steps as they exited the car. She moved with calm certainty, silver-streaked hair styled neatly, posture upright without stiffness. Her expression was composed, observant, unreadable. "Elena," Daniel murmured, "this is my mother." Margaret Cross smiled. Not wide, not cold, polite, intentional. "Elena," she said, offering her hand, "welcome." Elena accepted it, matching the pressure exactly, not submissive, not challenging. "Thank you for having me," she replied. Margaret's gaze lingered for half a second longer than necessary, then shifted to Daniel. "You look thinner," she said. Daniel smiled faintly. "Good to see you too, Mother." Inside, the estate felt less like a home and more like a museum of legacy. Portraits lined the walls, men in suits, women in gowns, generations captured in moments that felt more performative than personal. Dinner was formal, but not unfriendly. Questions came carefully. Where Elena grew up, what she did for work, how she and Daniel met. Elena answered smoothly, weaving the rehearsed story into conversation without sounding practiced. She laughed at the right moments, listened more than she spoke. When she touched Daniel's arm, it was light, natural. Margaret watched. Daniel's father entered midway through the meal, a tall man with a quiet presence that commanded attention without effort. His handshake was firm, his questions were gentle but precise. "You make my son comfortable," he said to Elena. "That's not common." Elena smiled softly. "He makes it easy." Daniel glanced at her, surprised. The evening stretched on. Wine was poured, stories were shared. Expectations hovered, unspoken but heavy. Later, as they walked the grounds, Daniel leaned closer. "You're doing well," he murmured. "So are you. You almost look human." He exhaled a quiet laugh. Margaret watched them from the terrace, hands folded, expression thoughtful rather than disapproving.
That night, Elena lay awake in the guest room, listening to the unfamiliar quiet of wealth. And for the first time since agreeing to the lie, she felt something unexpected settle in her chest. Not fear, belonging.
Morning arrived quietly at the estate. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, pale and restrained, illuminating a dining room set with more precision than warmth. Elena entered hesitantly, dressed simply, aware that in places like this, simplicity was rarely accidental. Margaret Cross was already seated at the long table, tea poured, posture perfect. She looked up as Elena approached, offering a small, welcoming nod. "Good morning," Margaret said. "Good morning," Elena replied. "I hope I'm not late." "Not at all," Margaret said. "Punctuality is appreciated here." Daniel arrived moments later, jacket already on, expression neutral. He pulled out a chair for Elena without thinking. The gesture wasn't rehearsed. That alone didn't go unnoticed. Conversation began gently. Safe topics, weather, travel, the state of the city. But beneath it all ran a quiet current of evaluation. Margaret asked about Elena's work, not with skepticism, but curiosity. Elena spoke honestly, not embellishing, not diminishing. "I value stability," Elena said at one point, "especially when other things in life feel uncertain." Margaret considered that. "Stability is often misunderstood as lack of ambition," she said. "It's refreshing to hear it framed differently." As the morning continued, Elena moved naturally through the space. She thanked staff by name after learning them. She listened more than she spoke. She didn't attempt to impress. Daniel noticed something shifting. His parents weren't warming to Elena because she fit expectations. They were warming because she didn't try to. Later in the garden, Daniel's father joined them, hands clasped behind his back. "You bring calm with you," he said to Elena. "That's a rare quality." Elena smiled, genuine. "I learned it out of necessity." Margaret watched from the terrace again, thoughtful rather than distant. When Daniel and Elena found themselves briefly alone near the fountain, he spoke quietly. "They like you." Elena glanced at him. "They're observing me." "That's the same thing here," he replied. She exhaled softly. "You grew up under this?" "Yes." "No wonder you learned control so young." Something in his expression shifted at that. Recognition, relief. By afternoon, the atmosphere had softened. Laughter surfaced unexpectedly. Stories from Daniel's childhood emerged, ones he hadn't heard in years. Elena listened, eyes warm, occasionally touching his hand without calculation. It was convincing, too convincing. As the day wound down, Daniel realized something unsettling. For the first time in his life, he wasn't performing for his family. He was watching someone else do it better than he ever had, and he didn't want the act to end. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Daniel had planned the weekend down to the minute. Meals, walks, conversations carefully staggered to avoid surprises. Elena had followed every step with quiet precision. The illusion was holding, until the phone rang. Elena felt it vibrate in her pocket just as Margaret was finishing a story about Daniel's childhood piano lessons. She didn't move at first. She didn't look down. She already knew who it would be. The vibration came again. Daniel noticed, not the phone, but the way Elena's posture changed. Her shoulders tightened, her breathing shifted. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." Margaret nodded. "Of course." Elena stepped out into the hallway, heart already racing. She answered on the second ring. "Lucas?" "Mama?" Her son's voice came through thin and uneven. "The machine is beeping again." Everything else vanished. "I'm here," Elena said instantly, turning toward a window, lowering her voice. "Is Mrs. Alvarez with you?" "Yes," Lucas said,
followed by a cough that made Elena's chest ache. "But she said I should call you." Daniel appeared at the end of the hall. He hadn't meant to follow. He just felt something was wrong. Elena saw him, hesitated, then turned slightly away, shielding the phone. "I'll be home soon. Just breathe like we practiced, okay?" She listened for a few seconds longer, murmuring reassurance, then ended the call. Daniel stood there, silent. "I told you he wouldn't be involved," she said before he could speak. "I didn't plan this." "I know," he replied evenly. "Is he okay?" She shook her head once. "He has episodes, usually manageable, sometimes not." Daniel absorbed that quietly. Inside the sitting room, Margaret glanced toward the hallway. "Everything all right?" she asked. Elena took a breath. This was the moment she'd feared. "Yes," she said. There's something I should tell you." Daniel didn't stop her. "I have a son. He's 6. I didn't mention him earlier because this weekend was about meeting you, not my circumstances, but I won't lie if asked." The room went still. Margaret's expression didn't harden. It didn't soften either. It became attentive. "A child," she said, "and Daniel didn't mention this." Elena looked at him briefly. "I asked him not to." Daniel spoke. "It wasn't my story to tell." Silence stretched. Then Daniel's father nodded once. "Thank you for being honest." Margaret studied Elena carefully, not with judgment, but with something closer to recalibration. "You should have told us," Margaret said to Daniel. "I know," he replied. Later, as dusk settled over the estate, Elena stood alone on the terrace, arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry," she said quietly when Daniel joined her. "This complicates things." "Yes," he agreed, "but not in the way you think." She looked at him, uncertain. "You're not an inconvenience, and neither is your son." Her eyes glistened despite her effort to remain composed. "I don't expect you to understand." "I don't," Daniel replied, "but I'm trying." Inside the house, Margaret watched them through the glass. And for the first time that weekend, she wasn't evaluating Elena as a partner for her son. She was seeing her as a mother, and that changed everything.
The estate settled into night with a kind of quiet that felt deliberate. Dinner had ended politely, conversation softened, the house exhaled. Somewhere down the corridor, a grandfather clock marked time with slow authority, each tick a reminder of how long the Cross family had existed, long before Daniel ever tried to define himself. Elena stood at the window of the library, watching darkness settle over the gardens. She hadn't meant to wander this far from the guest wing, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept circling back to Lucas, his breathing, the beeping machine, the helplessness she never quite escaped. "You won't find peace out there," Daniel said behind her. She didn't turn immediately. "I wasn't looking for peace." He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. The library smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Leather-bound volumes lined the walls, histories of industries built and fortunes preserved. Daniel had spent most of his childhood here, learning how to sit still, how to listen, how to never reveal more than necessary. "This is where my parents brought me when they wanted me to behave," he said. "Books teach silence better than people." Elena finally looked at him. "Is that where you learned it?" "Yes." They stood side by side, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence. "Out there," Elena said, nodding toward the main hall, "you're effortless, polite, untouchable." "And in here?" Daniel asked. "In here, you're tired." The word landed softly and accurately. Daniel exhaled, a sound that carried more weight than a sigh. "You know," he said, "everyone thinks I enjoy this, the expectations, the control, the certainty. And you don't?"
I tolerate it, he replied, because I was taught that tolerance is strength. Elena leaned against the window frame. That's not strength, that's endurance. He looked at her then, not guarded, not strategic, just honest. My father taught me how to win. My mother taught me how to appear stable. No one ever taught me how to rest. The silence between them shifted. When Lucas was born, Elena said slowly, I learned that you can't perform motherhood. You either show up or you don't. There's no applause for it. Daniel nodded, absorbing that truth with the focus he usually reserved for boardrooms. That's why you scare me, he admitted. She blinked. Because I have a child? Because you don't need the room. You don't feed off approval. You'd walk away if something didn't align with your values. That's survival, not bravery. From where I stand, they look very similar. A distant sound echoed through the hall, laughter from the sitting room. His parents, the world waiting for him to return. You should go back, Elena said gently. They'll wonder where you are. Daniel didn't move. For the first time, he said, I don't care. The word surprised them both. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition of loneliness that mirrored her own. You're not as alone as you think, she said. Daniel gave a small, almost rueful smile. Neither are you. They returned to the hall minutes later, composed once more. But Elena knew now. The man the world saw was a performance. The man who stood beside her in the library, quiet, uncertain, human, was the real Daniel Cross. And once seen, he couldn't hide again.
The house had gone quiet in the way only large estates ever did. Not asleep, just waiting. Elena stood at the sink in the guest wing bathroom, staring at her reflection as water ran uselessly over her hands. Her face looked the same, but something underneath it felt altered, like a fault line that had shifted without warning. She wasn't supposed to feel this. This was a role, a performance, a weekend with an expiration date. A soft knock came at the door. Elena? Daniel's voice, lower than usual. Careful. She closed the tap and took a breath. Yes? I wanted to make sure you were all right after earlier. She opened the door. Daniel stood there without the armor. No jacket, no rehearsed posture, just a man who looked uncertain in his own family home. I'm fine, she said. Lucas is settled. He nodded. If you need to leave. I don't, she interrupted gently. I wouldn't have stayed if I wasn't okay. They stood in the doorway, too close for strangers, too far apart for anything else. Thank you, Daniel said quietly, for not making today harder than it already was. Elena smiled faintly. You make it easier than you think. They moved to the small sitting room near the guest wing, instinctively choosing a space away from the watchful weight of the house. A single lamp cast warm light across the sofa, softening edges that daylight made severe. They sat, not rehearsing, not pretending, just there. You know, Daniel said after a while, this is the first time I've brought someone here without calculating the outcome. That sounds exhausting, Elena replied. It is, he admitted. You make me forget to do it. That was dangerous. She shifted slightly, turning toward him. Daniel, this ends on Monday. I know. You can't build expectations on something that isn't real. He met her gaze, steady. What if it's becoming real? The question hung between them, fragile and heavy. Elena's breath caught. That's not fair. I'm not asking for anything. I just don't want to lie to myself. Silence pressed in. She could see it now. The man behind the wealth, behind the discipline, behind the careful emotional distance.
He wasn't entitled, he wasn't careless. He was lonely. And so was she. Elena reached out without thinking, fingers brushing his hand. The contact was light, barely there, but it sent a jolt through both of them. They froze. This was the line. If they crossed it, nothing would be simple again. Daniel's thumb shifted slightly under her fingers, not pulling away, not advancing, waiting. Elena searched his face for expectation, found none, only restraint. She pulled her hand back slowly, heart pounding. "This is the moment," she said softly, "where we stop." Daniel nodded, once, slowly. "You're right." They sat there a few seconds longer, the space between them now charged with everything unsaid. When Elena stood, Daniel stood too, but he didn't follow her. "Good night, Elena," he said. "Good night, Daniel." As Elena closed the door to her room, she leaned her forehead against it, breathing hard. Across the hall, Daniel remained standing long after the light went out. Both of them knew the truth now. This wasn't just a lie that felt real. It was something real they were forcing themselves not to touch. And that restraint would cost them more than either was prepared to pay.
The alarm didn't scream. It choked. A sharp, broken sound ripped through the quiet estate at 2:17 a.m., slicing through sleep like glass. Elena woke instantly. Not confused, not groggy, trained by fear. She was already on her feet when Lucas's cough cut through the hallway, tight, wet, wrong. The kind of sound no parent ever forgets once they've heard it. "Lucas?" she called, voice steady even as her hands shook. No answer, just another cough, shorter this time, strained. She ran. The guest room door was half open. Lucas was sitting upright in bed, small hands gripping the blanket, eyes wide and glossy. Each breath looked like a battle his chest was losing. "Elena," he whispered, "I can't." She was beside him in seconds, fingers already reaching for the nebulizer on the nightstand. Too slow. His breathing hitched again, sharper now, panic setting in. "Elena?" he tried again. "I'm here," she said, forcing calm into every syllable. "I've got you. Look at me. Slow breaths, just like we practiced." She pressed the call button with one hand and pulled the mask over his face with the other. The machine whirred. Nothing happened. No mist, no hum. Dead. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered, checking the cord, the outlet, the backup battery. Nothing. Her hands moved faster, more frantic now. She reached for the inhaler. Empty. Her chest constricted. She hit the emergency call again, harder this time, then shouted into the hall. "Daniel!" Footsteps thundered almost immediately. Daniel appeared in the doorway, barefoot, hair disheveled, already alert. One look at Lucas and his face changed completely. "What do you need?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Hospital, now! His nebulizer failed. He's desaturating." Daniel was already moving. "Get him dressed," he said. "I'll bring the car around." "No," she said sharply. "I'm carrying him." Daniel nodded once and vanished. Elena scooped Lucas into her arms. He was lighter than he should have been, too light. His breathing rasped against her collarbone. "I'm sorry," Lucas whispered, words broken by shallow breaths. "Oh, baby," she murmured, holding him tighter. "You never have to be quiet." They didn't wait for staff. Daniel was at the front door when she reached the stairs, keys in hand, phone already open on emergency services. "Which hospital?" he asked. "St. Mary's. Pulmonary unit knows him." The drive was a blur of red lights and silent prayers. Daniel drove like nothing mattered except the road, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the console so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Elena counted breaths aloud, voice low and steady against Lucas's ear. "In, out, I'm right here." Lucas's head lolled slightly. "No," she said sharply. "Stay with me, sweetheart."
Daniel's voice broke through. "We're almost there." When they screeched to a stop at the emergency entrance, Daniel was out of the car before it fully halted, shouting for help. Doctors rushed forward. A gurney appeared. Elena didn't let go until they made her. As Lucas was wheeled away, she stood frozen, hands empty, chest heaving. Daniel caught her before she collapsed. She didn't resist. She gripped his shirt like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "This wasn't supposed to happen here," she whispered, shaking. "I planned everything. I checked his meds. "Stop," Daniel said softly, one hand firm on her back. "This isn't on you." She looked up at him, eyes raw. "This is my life, this fear, every night, every cough. I can't afford mistakes." Daniel swallowed hard. "We won't face it alone tonight." And for the first time since she'd known him, he didn't sound like a billionaire. He sounded like a father who understood fear. In the sterile glow of the hospital hallway, with her son fighting for breath behind closed doors, Elena realized something terrifying. This wasn't part of any agreement. This wasn't pretend. And whatever they were becoming, it was already far too real to walk away from.
The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Time moved strangely there, too fast in the mind, too slow in the body. Elena sat rigid in a plastic chair, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Across from her, a muted television played a morning news segment no one was watching. Every few seconds, the doors to the pulmonary wing opened. Every time they didn't call Lucas's name, her chest tightened. Daniel paced. Not the confident stride of a man used to boardrooms and leverage, but uneven, restless, human. He stopped every few steps, checked his phone, then put it away again as if it were useless. Finally, he sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Elena broke. "I didn't tell you everything," she said quietly. Daniel didn't look at her. "I know." She swallowed. "I didn't lie about Lucas being my son, or about his condition. But the money, the reason I agreed to this—" She stopped, breath shaking. "I'm drowning. Medical bills, medication, equipment, specialists. Every month it's a new number I can't reach. When I saw your offer, I didn't see luxury. I saw oxygen, time, a chance to keep him breathing without choosing which bill not to pay." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "When you said you didn't want to sleep on the sofa," she added, voice cracking, "it wasn't strategy. It was fear. I needed this to work. I needed them to believe we were real, because if they didn't—" Her voice failed her. Daniel turned to her then. "And if they didn't," he said, "you were afraid everything would fall apart." She nodded. "I've lived my whole life making myself smaller so nothing breaks. I didn't expect—" She gestured vaguely. "This." Daniel leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I hired you because I wanted quiet, control, a clean solution to a messy family expectation." He looked at her. "And then you walked in with a child who mattered more than image, more than money, more than any of it." He exhaled slowly. "My parents don't scare me. Loss does. I lost my sister when I was young. Different illness, same helpless waiting rooms, same sound of machines breathing for someone you love." Elena's head snapped up. "You never said—" "I don't," he replied. "Talking about it doesn't fix anything." They sat in shared silence again, heavier now, but honest. "What happens after this? After your parents leave? After the weekend ends?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. "I don't know, but I do know this. Whatever deal we made, it doesn't cover this room or that door." He nodded toward the pulmonary wing. "So if you want to walk away when this is over, I won't stop you." She looked at him, eyes glossy. "And if I can't?" Daniel met her gaze, steady.
Then we figure it out without pretending. At that moment, the doors opened. A doctor stepped out, scanning the room. "Elena Reyes?" She stood instantly. "Yes, that's me." The doctor smiled gently. "Lucas is stable. Oxygen levels are improving. We're keeping him overnight for observation, but he's out of danger." Elena's knees nearly gave out. Daniel caught her again. This time, she didn't apologize for leaning into him. She cried quietly against his shoulder, not from fear, from release. And as Daniel held her, he realized the truth he'd been avoiding since the night began. This wasn't about a lie anymore. It was about whether he was brave enough to choose what was real. Dawn arrived without ceremony. The hospital windows slowly shifted from black to gray, as if the night itself was retreating after losing its hold. Elena sat curled in a chair beside Lucas's bed, one hand resting lightly on his arm, afraid that even breathing too loudly might disturb the fragile peace. Lucas slept, oxygen tube in place, chest rising and falling in a steadier rhythm. Daniel stood near the window, jacket folded over his arm, tie loosened. He hadn't slept, he hadn't left, he hadn't checked a single email. When Elena finally looked up, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. "You should go home," she said softly. "Your parents can wait. This can't." She hesitated, then nodded. Silence filled the room again, but it was different now. No tension, no performance, just two people standing on the edge of something neither had planned. "I've spent my life building walls," Daniel said quietly, eyes still on the window. "Not because I enjoy them, because they work." Elena traced small circles on the blanket. "Walls keep danger out," she said. "They also keep help away." He turned toward her. "When you ran into that room last night," he continued, "you didn't ask permission, you didn't calculate, you just loved." Her voice was barely audible. "Love doesn't wait." Daniel swallowed. "I don't know how to do this halfway," he admitted. "If I step across this line, it won't be as a contract or a favor or a story we tell my parents." She stood slowly, closing the small distance between them. "I'm not asking you to save us. I've survived too long to need rescuing." Their faces were inches apart. "But I am asking you not to disappear. Not now. Not after this." Daniel exhaled, something inside him finally giving way. "I won't," he said, "even if it costs me control." Elena's eyes softened. "That's the most expensive thing you could offer." He smiled faintly. Outside the room, a nurse cleared her throat politely. "Visiting hours start soon, family only." Daniel looked at Elena. She didn't correct the nurse. Neither did he. And in that quiet omission, the line between pretending and truth finally vanished.
The first headline appeared before breakfast. Daniel saw it on his phone while standing at the hospital window, watching the city wake up below. "Cross Air spends night at public hospital. Sources confirm serious relationship." He didn't flinch. He'd known this moment would come the instant he chose not to leave. By the time Elena woke from her light sleep in the chair, 3 more alerts had arrived. One from a business channel, one from a gossip outlet, one from a private number he didn't answer. "What is it?" she asked, immediately alert. Daniel handed her the phone. The first headline appeared before breakfast. Daniel saw it on his phone while standing at the hospital window, watching the city wake up below. "Cross Air spends night at public hospital. Sources confirm serious relationship." He didn't flinch. He'd known this moment would come the instant he chose not to leave. By the time Elena woke from her light sleep in the chair, 3 more alerts had arrived. One from a business channel, one from a gossip outlet,
one from a private number he didn't answer. "What is it?" she asked, immediately alert. Daniel handed her the phone. She read silently, once, twice. Her shoulders stiffened. "I didn't talk to anyone," she said quickly. "I swear." "I know," Daniel replied. "Hospitals leak like sieves when money is involved." She closed her eyes. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." A nurse knocked gently and stepped inside. "There are people asking at the desk, reporters. Security's holding them back for now." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." When the door closed, Elena stood and paced the small room. "My son didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for cameras outside an ICU." Daniel stepped in front of her, forcing her to stop. "Then we end it," he said simply. She blinked. "And what?" "The spectacle," he continued. "Not us, the noise." She studied him carefully. "And how do you plan to do that?" "I'll make a statement. Clear, boring, non-negotiable." She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You've never done boring." "Then I'll learn." He made the call himself. By noon, a press release went out under his name alone. Daniel Cross confirms that a private family medical matter brought him to St. Mary's Hospital. He asks for respect and distance. Any intrusion involving a minor will be pursued legally. No further comment. It was brief. It was firm. It detonated anyway. Phones rang non-stop. His parents' assistant called, his father's lawyer, board members, investors. Daniel ignored them all. That was what frightened them. Margaret arrived at the hospital just after noon. She didn't bring an entourage, just a coat, a calm expression, and eyes that took in everything. She found Daniel in the hallway. "Elena," Margaret said gently, "may I speak with my son?" Elena nodded. "Of course." Margaret waited until they were alone. "You've made a decision," she said. "Yes." "That will have consequences." "I know." Margaret studied him, then surprised him by reaching out and straightening his collar like she used to when he was a boy. "You look different, not reckless, just anchored." Daniel swallowed. "Lucas?" she asked quietly. "He's stable." "Good." She looked toward the room where Elena sat beside her sleeping child. "She's not weak, that much is obvious." "No, she's not." Margaret met his eyes. "Then don't let this world make her pay for your courage." Daniel didn't hesitate. "I won't." And for the first time, he realized something profound. The world finding out wasn't the threat. The real test was what he chose to protect once it did. The offer didn't come with fanfare. No dramatic announcement, no legal entourage. It came quietly, the way power often does when it's serious. Daniel found Elena in the hospital cafeteria late that afternoon, sitting with a cup of untouched soup, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Lucas at the beach, Lucas on a swing, Lucas asleep with a book open on his chest. "Margaret wants to speak with you," Daniel said gently. "Only if you're willing." Elena looked up, guarded. "About what?" "About help," he said. "The kind that doesn't come with strings, or at least fewer of them." She exhaled slowly. "I don't want charity." "I know," Daniel replied. "Neither does she." Margaret was waiting in a small conference room down the hall. No assistants, no files. Just a woman who had learned, over decades, when to be direct. "Elena," Margaret said warmly, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Elena nodded, remaining standing. "I won't take money in exchange for silence or gratitude or loyalty." Margaret smiled faintly. "Good. Neither would I respect that." She gestured to the chair. Elena sat. "My family has foundations, medical, educational, research-based. We fund hospitals, trials, long-term care, usually anonymously." Elena's jaw tightened. "Daniel told me. I said no." "He told me," Margaret said. "I asked him to let me try anyway." "Why?"
Because, she said carefully, this isn't about Daniel or image or control. She leaned forward slightly. It's about a child who deserves continuity of care without a mother wondering every month which bill gets paid. Elena's eyes burned. I won't be owned.
The hospital discharged Lucas just after sunset, not with celebration, just quiet relief. Elena packed the small duffel bag slowly, double-checking medications, instructions, follow-up appointments. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind was somewhere else, hovering over the invisible line she'd crossed the moment she accepted Margaret's offer. Daniel waited near the door, speaking softly with the nurse. When Lucas waved at him sleepily, Daniel smiled in a way that still surprised him. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Daniel's car waited at the curb, understated, unmarked, no driver, no spectacle. "I can take a cab," Elena said instinctively. Daniel shook his head. "Let me." She didn't argue. The drive was quiet. Lucas fell asleep almost immediately in the back seat, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Streetlights passed like slow heartbeats. "You don't regret it," Daniel said, not as a question. Elena looked out the window. "I regret that I needed it, not that I took it." "That matters," he replied. When they reached her apartment building, Daniel parked but didn't turn the engine off. The moment stretched. "This is where things change," Elena said softly, not dramatically, just permanently. Daniel nodded. "I know." She turned to face him. "I can't go back to pretending I don't care. I wouldn't ask you to. And I won't live in a world where everything I touch becomes a liability for you." He met her gaze, unwavering. "Then we stop living like that world gets to decide." Elena swallowed. "Daniel, if we do this, it won't be clean, or quiet, or easy." A faint smile touched his lips. "Nothing real ever is." She reached for the door handle, then paused. "This is the line," she said. "Once we cross it, we don't get to undo it." Daniel stepped out of the car and opened her door instead. He didn't kiss her. He didn't touch her. He simply said, "Then cross it with me." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. And for the first time since the lie began, they stepped forward not as a performance, but as a choice.
The fallout didn't announce itself with explosions. It arrived in emails, meetings, and carefully worded concern. Daniel faced it Monday morning in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the city. 12 people sat around the table. None of them mentioned Elena by name. They didn't have to. "The optics are complicated," one board member said, fingers steepled. Another added, "Personal entanglements during a sensitive phase aren't ideal." Daniel listened without interrupting. When they finished, he spoke calmly. "You're worried about risk." A murmur of agreement. "Then let's be clear," Daniel continued. "My personal life is not a liability. My judgment is." Silence. "And my judgment," he said, "has never been sharper." One investor leaned forward. "Are you prepared to step back if this escalates?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "If the choice is between stepping back from leadership or stepping away from my values." He paused. "I'll step back." That landed harder than any threat. Across town, Elena felt the fallout differently. Her landlord left a voicemail asking about media activity. A neighbor asked if she was the one from the news. A social worker called to verify that Lucas's care environment was stable. Elena answered every question calmly. She had nothing to hide. That afternoon, Daniel arrived at her apartment, not with flowers, not with apologies, with presence. They sat at her small kitchen table while Lucas colored nearby. "They might push me out," Daniel said simply. Elena stilled. "Do you regret it?" "No." "Then neither do I."
Later that evening, a knock came at the door. Margaret. "I won't stay long," she said. "I just wanted you both to hear this from me." She looked at Daniel first. "You may lose things." Then at Elena. "But you won't lose support." She placed a folder on the table. Contingency plans, quiet ones. Daniel exhaled. "You don't have to." "I do," she replied, "because this is what family does when it chooses courage." After Margaret left, Elena sat beside Daniel on the couch. "Are we ready for this?" she asked. Daniel took her hand. "We already are." Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, the fallout settled, and neither of them ran.
The decision didn't happen all at once. It happened in small, irrevocable moments. Daniel woke before dawn, the city still dark. Elena's breathing steady beside him on the narrow bed that had somehow become theirs. For the first time in years, his calendar felt irrelevant. No meetings, no damage control, no strategy calls. Just a choice. He slipped out quietly and stood by the window, watching early buses cut through mist. This was the hour when he used to feel powerful. Now he felt clear. When Elena woke, she found him making coffee in the tiny kitchen, sleeves rolled up, phone untouched on the counter. "You're up early," she said. "I didn't want to miss today." She studied him. "Today doesn't look special." Daniel smiled. "That's why it is." They walked Lucas to school together. Daniel knelt to tie a loose shoelace, ignoring the curious looks from other parents. Lucas hugged him hard before running inside. "He likes you," Elena said softly. "I know," Daniel replied. "That scares me more than board votes." At noon, Daniel went to Cross Global. Not to fight, to finish. He stood before the board again, but this time without speeches. "I'm stepping back, effective immediately." Shock rippled. "This isn't forced, it's chosen." One director asked, "And the company?" "I've built leaders. Now let them lead." He handed over access cards, signed documents, and walked out lighter than he'd entered. That evening, Elena found him sitting on the apartment floor with Lucas, building a crooked tower of blocks. "You're home early," she said. Daniel looked up. "I'm home." She sat down slowly, understanding dawning. "You really did it?" "Yes." "Why?" Daniel met her eyes. "Because love that survives lies deserves truth, and truth costs something." Elena reached for his hand. Outside, headlines began forming. Inside, dinner burnt slightly on the stove. They laughed. Later that night, after Lucas slept, Elena spoke the fear she'd been holding. "What if this ruins you?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Then it will rebuild me properly." She leaned into him, the future uncertain, unprotected by wealth or secrecy, but chosen. And that was enough. The world didn't take Daniel Cross's silence well. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Billionaire CEO steps down without explanation. Daniel Cross vanishes from Cross Global. Power move or personal collapse. Analysts speculated. Investors panicked. Talk shows filled the gaps with guesses dressed as certainty. Daniel didn't watch any of it. He was too busy helping Lucas with a science project at the kitchen table, glue sticking to his fingers, instructions half ignored. "Elena," Lucas said seriously, "do you think volcanoes can erupt underwater?" "They do," she replied. "They just look different." Daniel smiled at that. By noon, Cross Global's stock dipped 8%.
By evening, reporters found the building where Daniel no longer lived. None of them found the narrow apartment with peeling paint and a broken buzzer, where dinner was eaten on mismatched plates and laughter came easily. But the world kept pushing. Margaret Cross arrived quietly. No entourage, no announcement. She stood in the doorway, hands folded, taking in the small space, the framed drawings on the wall, the scuffed floor, the absence of grandeur. "This is where you are," she said. "Yes, and where I plan to stay." Margaret looked at Elena, not assessing, observing. "You've changed him," she said gently. Elena shook her head. "He changed himself." Margaret nodded, accepting the correction. That night, Daniel received one final call from the board. "We need you back," the chairman said. "The markets trust you." Daniel glanced at Elena, who was helping Lucas brush his teeth. "No," Daniel said. "The markets never trusted me. They trusted what I controlled. And now? Now I'm accountable to 3 people. That's enough." The call ended. Outside, a camera flash went off somewhere down the street. Inside, Lucas climbed into Daniel's lap with a book. "Can you read tonight?" Lucas asked. "Always," Daniel said. The world could speculate. The truth was already decided.
A year later, the world still talked about Daniel Cross, just not the way it used to. Cross Global survived without him. New leadership, new headlines, new faces pretending to be irreplaceable. Daniel never read them. His mornings began with sunlight through curtains Elena had sewn herself, the smell of coffee, and Lucas arguing that cereal counted as a balanced breakfast. They moved, not to luxury, but to a modest house near a park where Lucas could ride his bike safely. Daniel fixed a fence with his own hands and learned, slowly, that mistakes made with effort felt better than perfection bought. Elena worked part-time at the community clinic now, by choice, not desperation. Daniel volunteered there twice a week, quietly funding equipment without plaques or announcements. People eventually noticed, not the money, the consistency. One afternoon, Daniel stood at the school auditorium while Lucas presented a project titled, "What Makes a Family Strong?" Lucas didn't mention wealth, didn't mention success. He said, "A family is strong when people stay, even when it's hard." Daniel felt Elena's hand slip into his. That night, after Lucas slept, Daniel took Elena to the park. No photographers, no speeches, just a small box. "I can't promise safety," Daniel said, "or certainty, or that the world won't knock again." Elena smiled, eyes steady. "I don't need protection. I need partnership." He knelt anyway. When she said yes, the sound felt louder than any boardroom applause he'd ever received. The wedding was small. Margaret Cross sat in the front row, Lucas between her and Elena's mother, holding the rings with exaggerated seriousness. When asked to declare family, Lucas spoke first. "We already are," he said. Laughter broke the tension. Love sealed it. Years later, Daniel would be invited to speak at conferences about leadership and sacrifice. He always declined, because the truest story he had to tell was lived quietly, at a dinner table, in a park, in the choice to stay. Not every ending changes the world. Some change everything that matters, and that was enough.